This is the first section of Chapter 1 of Fundamentals of Principles of Psychology. First section begins with psychology's roots. As the textbook explains, behavior is difficult to define, and humans have been struggling to define it for centuries. No records can be found of how prehistoric ancestors explained behavior, and it is very possible that they did not and actually had no idea how it worked. What ancestors did have to note was how people and other animals behaved to a certain extent, how they hunted, where animals traveled, how to obtain food and other such activities, so that they could imitate these activities in order to survive. The field of psychology has roots in early philosophy, as exemplified by the ancient Greeks, such as Plato, who taught Aristotle and explored the possibility of illusions, which includes his philosophy on forms versus material objects, but more importantly to psychology, includes how people perceive things when they see them, or sense them otherwise. However, he emphasized logic and reasoning over sensory experience due to his belief that what we perceive is not necessarily total reality. And he firmly believed in his cave example, the example of if someone were to leave the cave being of darkness, people are used to the cave and the darkness and don't understand what's outside. Going outside, somebody could be enlightened, but if they were to go back inside the cave, it would be difficult to convince the people inside of the cave of the truth outside of the cave. Plato's student Aristotle, who was commonly considered the father of science, was renowned for his somewhat deviation from Plato's philosophy, but in terms of psychology was important because he observed animals and humans and how they behaved, particularly how humans behaved in relation to each other, to the animals, and to their gods, and was popular for beginning the concepts of observation and other principles of science. Much later on, as the textbook bridges into, is the Enlightenment, which features such thinkers as René Descartes. Although he was more famous perhaps for his mathematical policies than for his psychological discoveries, René Descartes is nonetheless famous for I think, therefore I am, therefore the emphasis on how people think being a significant factor. And he developed a system of knowing not based on fallible senses, in other words, the use of logic and your own reasoning rather than what you perceive. And he introduced the concept of psychophysics, which is how different things affect our behavior. Empiricism is it's a school of philosophy and general thought that believes that knowledge can only come from sense experience. In other words, logic is nice and rationality is nice, but that can only go so far, and that in itself is affected by what you perceive in your environment. John Locke was a member of this school, and a rather famous member of his school, and he came up with, not necessarily came up with, but he reintroduced the policy of tabula rasa, the idea that an unborn baby or a newborn baby is brought into the world with a blank slate. The newborn baby doesn't know anything about the world until the baby experiences it. And the first section concludes with more modern explorers such as Charles Darwin, who is notorious for his discovery of evolution by natural selection, and his finding that all human behaviors have beginnings in earlier ancestors. Margaret Floyd Washburn is another one. She described behavior of many animals and related them to the human mind. She described animal behavior and related it to human behavior. And that's all for the first section of the first chapter of Principles of Psychology.